When an unexpected and terrible headache ruins a man's day, his wife volunteers to check his head to make sure it's nothing serious, but what she sees makes her furiously call the police. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and Daniel Grayson had just finished trimming the hedges in his garden. His wife, Rachel, was in the kitchen preparing lemonade for them both. The smell of freshly baked cookies drifted through the open window, mixing with the scent of freshly cut grass. "Daniel, are you okay out there?" Rachel called, noticing how long he'd been quiet. "Yeah, just finishing up," Daniel replied, though his voice sounded a bit strained. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and felt a sharp stab at the top of his skull. At first, he didn't think much of it, but when he stood up, a sudden and unbearable headache hit him, as if someone had stabbed his temple with a spike. He groaned, clutching his head. Rachel, hearing his cry, ran out the back door. She found Daniel leaning against the hedge, his face pale, sweat dripping from his temples. "What's wrong?" she asked, worried. "I don't know, my head," Daniel murmured, slurring slightly. "It feels like it's splitting open." Rachel took his arm and guided him to the porch swing. "Sit down, let me take a look." She brushed back his damp hair to feel his forehead for a fever. As she touched the top of his head, she felt something strange. His hair was sticky. When she pulled her hand back, it was stained with a dark red substance. "Blood." "Daniel, you're bleeding," she exclaimed, her heart racing. "What? From where?" he asked, wincing as he carefully touched the top of his head. His fingers came away red. Rachel's mind raced. How could he be bleeding without realizing it? "Let me get a better look," she said. Grabbing her phone's flashlight, she held it up as she gently parted his hair, revealing a small but deep gash on his scalp. The wound looked fresh, and the edges were jagged, as if something sharp had caused it. "This doesn't make sense," Rachel said, voice filled with concern. "You didn't fall or hit your head, right?" Daniel shook his head weakly. "I've been in the yard the whole time, trimming the hedges. I didn't even feel anything until the headache." Rachel frowned, inspecting the area more closely. That's when she saw something glinting beneath the skin, a small metal shard. Her stomach turned. "Daniel, did you notice anything strange while you were outside? Anyone near the yard? Anything unusual?" she asked, her tone sharper. "No, it was quiet," Daniel replied with a grimace. "Why?" Rachel didn't respond right away. Her mind was spinning with a terrifying possibility. The wound didn't look like the result of a fall or accident. It looked deliberate, like something sharp had been thrown at him. The metal shard embedded in his scalp wasn't an accident, it was intentional. "I have to clean this and see if I can get that piece out," she said, her voice shaky. She ran inside to grab the first aid kit and a pair of tweezers. When she returned, she carefully cleaned around the wound, exposing more fragments of metal. Her frustration grew as she worked. "This doesn't just happen, Daniel. Someone did this." Daniel blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "This isn't an accident," Rachel said, holding up the tweezers. The small fragment she had extracted looked like a piece of sharp steel, possibly from a dart or some kind of projectile. "You were attacked." "Attacked?" Daniel echoed, his headache momentarily forgotten, shock settling in. "But by who? Why? And how didn't I notice?" Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her phone and dialed 911. "Rachel, wait," Daniel said, alarmed. "Maybe it's not what you think." She shot him a furious look. "It is what I think. Someone hurt you, Daniel. This wasn't some random accident, and what if they're still out there, waiting to do it again?" The operator answered, and Rachel's voice was firm but seething with restrained anger. "I need to report an assault. My husband has been injured in our garden. He has a deep head wound caused by what appears to be a thrown object, a piece of metal. Yes, I need someone here immediately." When she hung up, Daniel stared at her with a mix of fear and confusion. "You think someone did this on purpose?" Rachel crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "I don't think, Daniel, I know. And I'm not letting this go." A few minutes later, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. As they waited for the police, Rachel kept looking toward the edges of the yard, watching the bushes and the tree-line. She was sure someone had tried to hurt her husband, and she wasn't going to rest until they found out who and why. Two officers stepped out of the car. One was a tall, composed woman, Officer Bennett, and the other, a younger man, Officer Ramirez, who carried a notebook and pen. Rachel led them straight to the porch where Daniel sat with a damp cloth on his neck. "Mr. and Mrs. Grayson," Officer Bennett greeted, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. "You reported an injury possibly caused by an assault." "Yes," Rachel said firmly, handing her the small metal fragment she'd removed. "I found this embedded in his scalp. This wasn't an accident." Bennett examined the piece carefully, her expression turning serious. "This looks like part of a dart or some kind of sharp projectile," she said, passing it to Ramirez, who bagged it as evidence. "Mr. Grayson, can you tell us what happened?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Honestly, I don't know. I was in the yard trimming hedges when I suddenly got this terrible pain in my head. My wife found the wound when I came to sit down. I didn't see or hear anything strange, no loud noises. No one yelling or moving around near your property, Ramirez asked. Daniel shook his head slightly, wincing. Nothing. It was quiet. Officer Bennett turned to Rachel. You said you believe this was deliberate. Why? Rachel crossed her arms. Because of the wound, and that metal shard. That doesn't happen by accident. He didn't fall or hit his head on something sharp. The officers exchanged looks. Have you noticed anyone lurking around the neighborhood? Anyone who doesn't belong? Any conflicts with neighbors? Bennett asked. Rachel hesitated. Their neighborhood was peaceful, full of families and retirees, but then she remembered something. There have been some teenagers hanging around the nearby park, she said. I saw them last week with slingshots. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, Bennett frowned. Slingshots could be a possibility. Did you get a good look at them? Not really, Rachel admitted. But they looked about 15 or 16, 3 boys. They were cutting through backyards to get to the park. Good to know. We'll check into it, Bennett said, turning to Ramirez. Let's take a look at the yard. As the officers investigated, Rachel sat beside Daniel, the anger still simmering. If it was those kids, they'll pay. Let's not jump to conclusions, Daniel said quietly, his head still throbbing. It could have been anything, but when Officer Ramirez returned a few minutes later, his expression was grim. We found something, he said, holding up a small homemade dart with a sharp metal tip. It was stuck in the fence near where Mr. Grayson was standing. Rachel's stomach twisted. So it was a dart. Yes, Ramirez confirmed. Looks homemade. Probably fired with a slingshot or something similar. If it hit with enough force to cause that injury, whoever shot it was aiming, or very close. Officer Bennett joined them. This isn't just mischief, she said seriously. Throwing projectiles like this at someone can cause serious harm. We'll have to monitor the area and speak with the kids you mentioned. In the meantime, stay alert. Rachel nodded, her determination hardening. I want them caught, she said. This isn't just about Daniel. What if they hurt someone else? Understood, Bennett replied. We'll do everything we can to resolve this quickly. As the officers left to begin their investigation, the Graysons were left with a quiet, uneasy tension, and the certainty that someone had deliberately turned a quiet afternoon into a nightmare. Daniel and Rachel sat together in the living room, still processing the weight of what had happened. Rachel paced back and forth, still furious. I can't believe it. Kids playing with weapons. What kind of parents allow that? Daniel sighed and reached out, gently taking her hand to calm her for a moment. I'm okay, Rachel, let's wait and see what the police find out. The next day, the officers returned with updated information. They had spoken to several neighbors in the area, including a retired man who often sat on his porch overlooking the park. He confirmed having seen 3 teenagers with slingshots the previous afternoon, laughing and shooting at targets. He described them and even mentioned which house one of them lived in. Officer Bennett got straight to the point. We've identified the boys responsible. They admitted to firing the dart as part of a dare. One of them claimed they weren't aiming to hit anyone, just the fence. Still, they'll face consequences. Rachel clenched her fists. And what about their parents? Are they just going to get a slap on the wrist? The parents have been notified, and we've recommended they cover Mr. Grayson's medical expenses, Bennett replied. Beyond that, we're issuing citations and will involve juvenile services if necessary. After the officers left, Rachel let out a long sigh, some of her anger finally fading. At least they caught them, she said. But this neighborhood isn't what it used to be. Daniel gave a faint smile. Maybe not, but we'll get through this. Next time, I'll wear a helmet while gardening. The days following the police intervention were quiet, but Rachel couldn't shake a lingering unease. Even though the teenagers responsible for the dart had been caught, she had a persistent feeling that something wasn't right. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that it wasn't just a simple dare gone wrong. There had to be something more behind it. After all, those teens were known troublemakers in the neighborhood, but Rachel's instincts told her that the full story hadn't come to light. It felt like something was missing. Some underlying motive. Her thoughts spiraled until she could no longer ignore the suspicion. It was Wednesday afternoon when she decided to take matters into her own hands. Daniel was resting in bed, still nursing his aching head, though he insisted he was feeling better and that the wound was healing. Rachel, however, wasn't going to let it go. She called Officer Bennett and asked if they could meet at the station to discuss the case further. Rachel had a few more questions when she arrived at the precinct. Bennett met her in the lobby. Mrs. Grayson, she greeted her with a polite but weary smile. What brings you here? Rachel didn't waste time. I don't think those kids acted alone. Bennett raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? They admitted to firing the dart. Yes, but they kept insisting they didn't mean to hurt anyone. That doesn't sit right with me. What if they were just following orders? Orders? From who? Bennett asked. Rachel hesitated, then took a deep breath. I don't know yet. but I want to know where they got the slingshots, who told them to shoot at the fence, and why they aimed at my husband specifically." Officer Bennett looked skeptical but nodded. "I'll see what I can do. We've identified the boys, but I'll go back through their backgrounds. Maybe there's something we missed." The following days were filled with tense anticipation, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just reckless teenage behavior. Then, on Friday night, Bennett called. "We found something," she said on the phone, her voice unusually serious. "We spoke to one of the parents, and there's a twist you probably weren't expecting." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "One of the boys, Lucas, his mother works at a local law firm. She's been involved in some questionable cases. The firm has ties to a few shady clients, and it turns out Lucas's slingshot was custom-made. A gift from his uncle, a former convict who's been in and out of prison for multiple violent offenses." Rachel's stomach turned. "So you're telling me this is connected to something bigger than just a group of kids messing around?" "That's what it looks like," Bennett replied. "We're still piecing it together, but it seems Lucas's uncle has had disputes with people in the neighborhood, including some real estate developers. There's talk of land disputes and shady dealings. We believe someone might have been trying to intimidate you and Daniel, using the boys as pawns." Rachel's thoughts spun. Her first instinct had been that this was just a random attack, kids causing trouble, but this wasn't random. This wasn't just a harmless prank. It was personal. 2 weeks later, the story took another unexpected turn. Lucas reached out to Rachel. He and his friends, frightened and remorseful, had agreed to testify. They were devastated that their childish actions had led to such serious consequences. It turned out the slingshot was meant as a gift from Lucas to his uncle, who had often ranted about how much he hated Daniel. The man had been trying to close a shady land deal, but it fell through when Daniel refused to sell his property. Ever since, Lucas's uncle had held a grudge, but had been too afraid to act directly, fearing another prison sentence. Lucas and his friends had decided to act on his behalf, but now they realized they'd made a terrible mistake. Rachel and Daniel watched as the authorities pieced together the final parts of the case. It felt like a weight had been lifted, though the scar on Daniel's head would always be a reminder. "I guess things aren't always what they seem," Rachel said quietly, staring at the spot where the dart had struck Daniel. "You don't say," Daniel replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "But we made it through, and we're not going anywhere." Just then, the doorbell rang. Rachel opened the door to find a small package on the doorstep. Inside was a simple note. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far, Lucas." Rachel let out a soft sigh. "Not everyone is beyond redemption, I suppose." Do you agree with Rachel, or do you believe some people simply can't be saved? What do you think about kids who intentionally hurt others for fun? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.